Uh,
First.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you this morning. Sorry that it couldn't be in person. I know that we've had the McNair conference at the UCLA campus 2 summers in a row. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do it this year, but this is certainly a great way to connect with you. My name is Sam Bersola. I'm the Assistant Vice Provost in the Graduate Division. I've been working at the Graduate Division in UCLA this is my 13th year. And I think the thing to note about myself is that I actually started my career in undergraduate admissions. My first job actually was at USC across the freeway doing undergraduate recruitment. And I think what brings some credibility to my work and to this kind of work and talking about graduate admissions and statement of purpose is that I can help students in thinking about how to position themselves for graduate admissions that's different from the ways that maybe you position yourself for college admissions. So I know what that transition was like when most 18 years old applied to college. Now that you're older, or maybe even a little bit older, a lot older, I'm gonna help you, I can help you make that statement of purpose even stronger for a faculty committee that will be looking at your graduate admissions. So it's, again, a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Thank you. So I'm Susan Ettner. It is indeed a great pleasure to be with all of you. I wish we could see you in person, but thank you so much for joining us. I know people are probably very tired of Zoom talks, so we really appreciate the fact that you took the time to come and listen to us presenting. So again, I'm Susan Ettner. I am an economist by background. And I have many roles. I am faculty member at UCLA. I have been at UCLA since 1999. Before that, I spent 8 years at Harvard. I'm an economist, but because I do health economics and health services research, my faculty appointments are in the schools of medicine and public health. And as a faculty member in the School of Public Health, I served on their admissions committee for the MS and PhD degrees for many years. About 3 years ago, I joined the graduate division as an associate dean, half-time, still retaining my faculty appointment. And starting this month, August 1st, I will be the interim graduate dean for the year. So I come at this question from both my faculty lens on, having read many admissions statements from doctoral and MS applicants in the past, and also with my graduate dean hat on. So we hope to have some useful tips for you today, and we'll just get started with the talk, and I look forward to answering all of your questions afterwards. And also you should feel free to reach out after the talk, after the presentation. Sam, I'm not sure if we have our contact information at the end of this, but perhaps there's a way that we can put that in the chat so that they can contact us or Dia if they have any follow-up questions that we don't end up getting to today.
I think it might be in our bios, but if not, definitely we can give that to you.
Okay.
We have 24 slides in 40 minutes, so that gives you a sense, and Susan's going to start.
Okay, so the talk is about how to write a statement of purpose for your application. And so we're going to just start with explaining a little bit about what the statement of purpose is. So this is really your voice to the admissions committee. You know, as you can imagine, at UCLA for our programs, we get many applications, and people are, you know, the admissions committee members are reading through lots and lots of these, and you really want to try to figure out a way to stand out, because I'll be honest, it can be challenging sometimes when you read through the admissions essays and they start to sound the same after a while. And so you're really looking for something that is both well written and also sort of unique in certain ways and catches your eye. So we'll talk more about that later in this presentation. But this is really what it's about. This is your moment to shine and have us understand who you are and why you would be a great fit for UCLA. And you have to do all of this in, you know, about 600 words. So you don't have a really a lot of space to do it in, but we'll give you some tips as to how you can manage that. So next slide. So the first point that we would make too is that the expectations for what this statement of purpose will look like does vary by field department as well as by faculty reviewer, because some faculty will prefer very short statements and some will prefer longer statements. But you want to just sort of think about your statement in terms of, are you applying to a STEM or humanities or social science program? Especially, it makes a big difference if you're thinking about academic versus professional degree programs, because the professional degree programs will put a lot more weight on things like, you know, your work experience, your prior work experience, what you've done out in the community, for example. So it's very different if you're applying for an MPH degree, for example, where you're expected, excuse me, you're expected to take that degree and go out there and do things out in the world. But you're not expected to be an academic researcher. Whereas, for example, an MS degree, which doesn't, in public health, which doesn't sound that different, but in fact, the focus is quite different, because they're really looking for evidence that you're going to be a good researcher, because you're taking lots of methodology courses. So think about, you know, how you want to frame yourself given the type of degree that you are looking into. And again, the length is about 2 pages or 600 words.
Okay. This like talks about the demonstrating familiarity with the department or school to which you're applying. So notice that this, I'll just read the statement. This came from an application. It says, I am interested in your program because many of the faculty members at your university are conducting research in areas of my methodological, theoretical, and geographical interests. For example, Dr. A has conducted research with coastal populations of the Pacific, including the Chumash. So notice that this is a very sophisticated opening. They're going to talk about methodologies. They're going to talk about theories. They might talk about geographical preferences of where they want to do the research. And again, remember when I told you the difference between high schooler applying to college and a college student applying to grad school? A high school student would never probably use the word method or theory or even geographical interest, maybe if they wanted to study abroad. But you see how it's starting to become much more sophisticated in the language that you use and how they're setting up, or at least framing their statement here. And so we're going to go into some details and talk a little bit more about methodology and theory, but geographical interest could be explained here. This one happens to do with coastal populations of the Pacific, and I know that Chumash are here in California as well. So it's important to demonstrate maturity about what you hope to pursue and why. And so here are the statements that I used to hear a lot of 18 and 17-year-olds wanting to go to college. That was perfectly acceptable then. I want to go to college because I love to read, because I love to learn new things, because I love school, or because I want to make a difference. Those are all great things for college, but it's not going to be good enough for grad school. Everyone should love to read. At this point, and we hope that you love school because you're going to be in it for another 4, 5, 6 years, maybe even 7. But instead, what you want to do is you want to capture these kinds of sentiments or statements. I want to learn research methods to help solve the pressing problems in my field. I want to develop expertise in the theoretical constructs in my field. I want to bring theory to practice, or I want to add to the literature in my field. And so notice these, again, are not the statements that high school students would have known to say, but at this point, we're looking for some insights that you would have on adding to the research and the scholarly work that we do as a research institution.
Thank you, Sam. And I would just add that you really are sort of telling a story too in your statement about how you got to that point and what the skill sets are that you've learned. So we'll talk more about this, but you really want to sort of outline where you came from, intellectually, that is, and where you're trying to get to. So just have a clear story to tell. But while you're telling your clear story, one point that I wanted to make was that you want to make sure that you're not regurgitating the thesaurus. And what I mean by that is that, as I have experience reading many essays, many of these statements of purpose, sometimes quite honestly, it becomes a little bit painful to read some statements, and I feel bad for the student, but it's clear that they're trying too hard to impress the committee by, it almost looks as though they've taken the statement written in regular English and they've used the thesaurus to try to change every simple word into something much more complicated in an effort to sound erudite. And, you know, it's fine to throw in a word. There was an example, I threw in a word, but there's one word, but you don't want every second or third word to be long and complicated, because that doesn't look natural either. We just want you to be you. And, you know, it will be impressive to us if you can explain clearly, even using very simple language, if you can just explain clearly why you would be a good fit for our program, what you bring to the table, and what you're hoping to get out of it. And you know, so that we have a vision of, does this person have the skill set and experience to be successful in our program? And in turn, are they looking to develop skills, or are they looking for some kind of experience that will actually further their goals, that will meet their own goals that they are setting for why they're going to graduate school? And if the answer to those questions is yes, or yes and yes, then you know, then it's a good fit. So so again, you know, the first thing you need to do is really state what you have to offer and convince the department or program that you're qualified. And going back to the earlier slide, qualified for what? Keep in mind what you're applying for. It's different. If you're applying for an MBA program, then what you have to offer and being qualified for that will look a little bit different than if you're applying for a PhD in mathematics and you're planning to do theoretical mathematical research for the rest of your life. So keeping in mind what it is, what program you're trying to get into, you're going to sort of explain again your background, your experience, your education. If you're applying for a research degree, then sort of what experience you have conducting research, what methods you've learned. And you want to sort of emphasize the basics, but also you want to talk about what makes you different, because we said this earlier, that this is your chance to sort of stand out. And so there are many different ways in which you can stand out, but you want to catch the attention of those individuals who are reading your essay, so that you don't just look like everybody else. So what makes you different? And also it's very important how your interests match those of the faculty, because, you know, they're looking not only at, is this student qualified? Can they learn the material? Can they do this? But also, can we give them what they need? Can we provide good mentoring to them? And, you know, I can tell you from experience that we had one student who applied for the doctoral program in my department. And the student looked so great in so many ways, but when you read the essay, it was very clear that they did not have the right understanding of what kind of training we could provide to them, and that their goals were not aligned with ours. And this was very disappointing to us, so much so that we actually decided that we would meet with the student or with the applicant just to make sure that that was really what they wanted. We met with him. He was terrific, and he definitely was looking for a very different kind of training, a different kind of education than what we knew we would be able to provide to him. So we then pointed him in a different direction and gave him some advice about where he would need to go, and explained to him that this wasn't what we actually did. And he appreciated that. And, you know, but this is just to say again, that you can have an applicant that looks really good, but if we don't think that that applicant is looking for the kind of education or training that we are able to provide, then it still won't be a good match, and we still won't admit that applicant. So if you think that, you know, what you're looking for really is us and our program, then you want to make sure that you explain why your interests are a good fit with those of the faculty. And that'll involve a little bit of research. And of course, that means more work for you, because every program that you apply to, you're going to need to do a little bit of research on who are the faculty in that program and what do they do. And, you know, Google Scholar can be really helpful. You also want to note that the websites are often outdated, unfortunately. We don't update our websites very much, so not as much as we should. And so sometimes people's research has shifted a bit too. So in addition to looking up the website for the person and figuring out from there what they're working on, it might also be useful if you notice that the citations are older, or it doesn't look like the site has been updated very frequently, then you might want to go onto Google Scholar and try to look at what that person has been doing more recently. It's really helpful in your statement to list the faculty by name. And I think Sam's going to be giving some examples in a minute for, you know, listing faculty by name that you think that you would like to work with, or that would be a good match for your interests. But I would just caution you, be very careful to name the right people. And my example is that I've seen applications where the applicant said that they were interested in researching a certain area. And then they listed some faculty. I would like to work with X, Y, and Z faculty, but they listed the wrong faculty. They listed faculty maybe that they had the chance to speak with. I'm not sure where they got those names from, but they left out the faculty who are actually closest to their own work and who are doing work in that area. And so you can sometimes shoot yourself in the foot if you don't do your research properly or thoroughly, because if you're listing somebody who's not in your area and you fail to list the person who is in your area, that doesn't look like you spent a lot of time doing your research on which graduate programs you were interested in.
Yeah.
So I would just encourage you to be thorough in that sense.
Right. And notice that we said faculty X, Y, Z. It's probably not a good idea for you to just list one faculty member. That faculty member may be on sabbatical, they may not be taking students, they may have already retired, you have no idea what has happened. And so it's going to help you if you can list more than one. I would say 3 might be good. I wouldn't overwhelm them with 10. 3 might be a good number for you. Here's an example of what we think you could do if you went onto our web and looked at our superstar faculty. This is Professor Nanthya Suthana, and this student, we actually made this up, but it reads this way. If possible, I'd like to work with Professor Nanthya Suthana at UCLA because her neurosurgery lab is the first to combine freely moving virtual reality and motion tracking on human participants with implanted depth electrodes. I'm interested in becoming an expert in neural changes underlying successful learning and memory, and would like to be part of a team that is developing non-invasive methods for improving cognitive function. I also learned that Professor Suthana won a prestigious mentoring award from the UCLA Postdoctoral Scholars Association in 2020, and as a woman of color in STEM who's had few female role models of color, I would be thrilled to be one of her mentees. So this talks about her research. It talks about how her research aligns well with what you want to do, but it also personalizes it in saying that I really already connect with this person as a woman of color in STEM. And so that's perfectly okay to say, especially since we want to make sure that you feel comfortable and you feel successful and you feel well matched and supported. We're going to give you another example. This is another real superstar at UCLA who won the field medal. Professor Terrence Tao would be my top choice if I were able to choose an advisor among the many superstar faculty in UCLA's math department. He won the prestigious field medal for his contributions to partial differential equations, combinatorics, harmonic analysis, and additive number theory. As a scholar, I too would like to cross different areas of math and unravel incredibly complicated mathematical problems and reduce them into simple, elegant, and understandable concepts. So that is Professor Terrence Tao, and I used to see him daily at the faculty center eating lunch. And yes, he does look that young. So I would say that interdisciplinarity is also really important. And if you feel that your research crosses disciplines at UCLA, I would mention that. And I think if you could dabble into folks in one area, if it makes sense, and don't force it if it doesn't make sense, but if it makes sense to dabble into another thing, that could be a plus, and it should be a plus to our faculty because we really encourage that. In fact, we have grants specifically for faculty and for students who are doing interdisciplinary work. So don't feel like you could only look under the health policy administration faculty because you're applying to that. I would make sure that one or two are mentioned there, but if there's someone else not in the field, I think that shows that you really know your research and how it has other applications outside of the field proper.
I would add two comments to what Sam just said. So the first one is that departments do vary. Even within UCLA, there's a lot of variation in terms of how students end up with a particular advisor or dissertation committee chair, as we talk about in my department. So, for example, in my department, we will assign a faculty advisor when the student comes in, and we will try to make it a good match and somebody that might hopefully develop into a dissertation committee chair. But there's no expectation that will necessarily be the person that you work with. And so this is health policy and management. Sorry, I should have reminded you of that. So in health policy and management, when we admit students, we assign them the advisor, but we really encourage them to talk to all the faculty, talk about your interests. We recognize that people might change their interests over time and they might want to, end up with a different advisor, and that's perfectly fine. So, it's great if you mention somebody that you might work with, but that won't necessarily be, the person that you end up with in the end, because you may choose to work with somebody else. So because of that, it looks good in your essay if you are able to mention people, but it's not, I think, quite as important as in other departments where they're essentially matching people with, it's more of a lab model where they're matching somebody, and then it may be more difficult to change later on. And so the reason I'm mentioning that is that in departments that have more of a model of we're admitting the student to work with this particular advisor, it becomes then really critical to get matched to the right advisor. And also, it may be more difficult if you're trying to get matched to a more popular advisor. And I think the example with Terrence Tao just reminded me that, sometimes you can get somebody who's up and coming, so they may not be the stellar name in the field, but they might be a wonderful mentor because, they might be more junior, but they're doing really interesting research. Someday they too will be the big name in the field, and they may have more time and energy to devote to students because they don't have quite so many students who want to be their mentee. So I just wanted to encourage you, and Sam, you can chime in here, but I just want to encourage you to think broadly about who might be the person that you would seek as your advisor if it's more that lab model that I was talking about. Is that? The other thing that the other cautionary note, just from my own experience, is it's great if you, mention UCLA by name and make it specific, but please, 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 before you submit your application, and this goes for all the schools that you're applying to, please do a word search and make sure that you're not using the wrong name, the name of the wrong institution, because I cannot tell you how often I have read an admission statement, a statement of purpose, and they conclude at the end by saying, and in conclusion, I would be truly honored to be admitted to, the Yale's program for health policy and management, or, so just make sure. It looks really bad if you don't, and we understand you're applying to lots of places. We're not the only one, but nonetheless, you don't want to give the impression that you're sloppy, because especially if you're applying for a research program, people worry that if there's any sign of sloppiness, people worry that may translate into your research methods and some amount of carelessness. So, check it over yourself, have somebody with quote unquote fresh eyes read it In fact, that's a really good strategy in general. You always want to recruit, family members and friends to read what, your statement of purpose. And even if they don't know anything about the field, they can still read it just for the tone and pick up typos or things like that. So always a good idea. Okay, so back to the program as planned. So, so this slide is talking about the importance of demonstrating your understanding of the methodologies used for researching your questions. And again, this may apply a little bit better to research, graduate research degrees, but it's also true even if you're applying for professional programs. So, and this will be, of course, very field specific. So the example here is actually quite different from my own field. So this example talks about, I documented detailed field notes, collected and coded a variety of student work samples, and conducted in-depth, semi-structured interviews with students. So you're talking about your experience, what you've done in the past research-wise, and not only the topic, but also how you did it. I can tell you in my own field of health policy management that this slide is absolutely on target. It's very impressive and reassuring to us when we read about somebody's research and they get into some detail about how they did it, because then we know that they weren't just sort of part of a big group and the other people did the heavy lifting, but they actually did it themselves. And so in my field, we use a lot of regression analysis. And so somebody might talk about how they examined, racial and ethnic disparities in access to behavioral health care. And, in doing that, they used, this data set, and they used, regression modeling, they used linear and logistic regression modeling, and they found these results, and, and this is what it meant. That kind of detail, I know you don't have a lot of space in the statement, but if you're going for a research degree, if you just give a little bit of detail like that, it's great, because then we look at that and go, wow, we're going to be training them to do this, but they actually already have experience doing it. And so, so we know that they can handle it, and we know that they're familiar with the training that they would be receiving from us if we admit them to the program. These are mine too. Okay, so make your statement personal, but not too personal. Don't divulge your full life story. Usually in addition to the statement of purpose, there's usually a diversity statement as well. And there certainly is at UCLA, and I assume at most places where you'd be applying. So sometimes you'll have more space, and it will be, in some cases, more appropriate to go into a fuller life story in your diversity statement, because you can talk more about sort of challenges or barriers, adversity that you've overcome. That's also good in the statement of purpose, but you may not want to go into quite as much detail, because in addition to talking about your own story and where you came from, you also have to fit in a lot of other detail. For example, all that experience with logistic regression modeling that I just mentioned. So, so here you want to kind of try to strike a good balance. And again, you want to touch upon all of your relevant experiences, academic experience, volunteer and employment experiences, as long as they're relevant. But you do not want to regurgitate your resume. So, so usually what you want to do is you want to focus on fleshing out anything where the resume may not fully tell the story that's relevant. So for example, if you have on your resume that you were a research assistant as an undergraduate and you worked on some lab experiment that would be relevant, your resume may just have one sentence on that. It's not going to have probably all the gory detail. But if that research that you did was very relevant to your graduate, to the graduate program, and for example, maybe it doesn't convey the fact that you did all the heavy lifting on that project. Sure, you were just, just a student researcher, but in fact, the PI ended up giving you, lots of responsibility, and you ended up doing all this work and really moving the project forward. you're not going to be able to convey all of that in your resume or your CV. And so your statement of purpose gives you the chance to flesh that out and say, you know, when I was an undergraduate, I worked in this lab on this experiment, and I was the one who did X, Y, Z, and Q for it. And, you know, you can really give us the details there. But you shouldn't feel as though you need to talk in detail about everything on your resume. And for example, if there's volunteer work that's relevant, you know, if you're coming to the School of Public Health to do an MPH and you're going to be out there working with community partners, for example, you know, I volunteered with Healthy African American Families, which is a not-for-profit organization in Los Angeles that's trying to improve healthcare for minority populations. You know, that would be very relevant if you're coming in to do an MPH, and so you could flesh that out more. But it may be, you know, if you're trying to apply for a PhD in theoretical mathematics, it may be enough just to have that on your resume and also to talk about that in your diversity statement. You may not want to include that, or at least as much detail on that in the actual statement of purpose.
Okay. So this comes from, again, my experience in helping high school students get into college. And you probably heard this when you were in high school, people saying, oh, the well-rounded students are the ones that get into college, or the ones that get funding or scholarships to go to college. And for graduate school, it's not so much. They're really looking at who is prepared for in-depth research. And so, as Susan just elaborated on very well, they're looking for things that would relate to the teaching, to the research, and to the public service missions of the university in ways that graduate students can influence or work in those areas. The other notion is show some modesty. And so while you want to put your best foot forward, you want to be the one to stand out in the crowd, you also don't want to be the one who looks like the expert and is going to school the faculty, because remember, they're the experts, at least for the time being. Maybe you can aspire to be their colleague someday, but at the time as you're their students, I think you have to show a willingness to be taught and learn from them. It's not to say that you should be totally modest. If there is some instrument that you've used in a lab that no one else has because only Caltech has it, or only a school that you visited has, then tell them. I actually know faculty members who feel that their leg up in the application was that they did an archaeological dig and used instruments that was at the time really cutting edge. And so, you know, go ahead and brag about that, but be open-minded to the fact that faculty have a lot to teach you, and you definitely want to learn from them.
Okay, so this is sort of writing 101, but again, you know, it's good just to be mindful of, you know, sort of the rules for good writing. So you want to be consistent and coherent in your presentation of ideas. Make sure that there's a solid beginning, middle, and end to your statement. And it's also really important to have a strong, captivating first sentence and paragraph. So we have a couple of examples. The caveat is that we're taking our examples in part from Grad Slam, which is an oral 3-minute presentation of people's research. And we love Grad Slam. If you've never seen our Grad Slam, go on YouTube and look up the videos, and they're really wonderful. They're really inspirational, actually. So it's amazing what these students are doing and what topics they're looking into. But in Grad Slam, it's really important to, you know, you have 3 minutes to captivate your audience and, you know, and win that prize. And so you have to grab them from the very first sentence. So they usually have very compelling opening statements. That's sort of what you want to aim for. But it'll be probably a little bit different when you're doing it in writing than when you're doing it orally. So when you go off and look at these Grad Slam presentations to be inspired, just keep in mind that, that what you write down is going to look slightly different from that. But a couple of examples here. So our Cassandra Meyer, who was the 2nd place winner in 2020 for Grad Slam, started off her presentation saying, "When I was in high school, one of my best friend's moms said that she started to feel like a monster was taking over her body, like she didn't have control over her own limbs. She said that on some days, the monster wouldn't let her move her arms and made it difficult to walk. My friend's mom was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I can't say it, sclerosis. So you can see that's already, that's already captivating people right from the get-go. Next slide. One of our finalists in 2020, Gil Torton, also had a great intro. He said, "Vision is the primary way that we interact with the world. Yet every year, hundreds of thousands of people are stricken with diseases like macular degeneration and retinitis pigmentosa, leaving them completely blind, drastically lowering their quality of life." Again, great statement. This is, important topic. Here's the issue. Here's the issue that I want to address, that I want to solve. Here's the problem. Third example, Lucia Iquino, who was a finalist in our Grand Slam, said, "Have you ever heard somebody say that you are what is written in your DNA? This sentence is quite scary, right? Do I have a say in the type of person I become, or is it all just written in my DNA?" Great opening statement. These are all really great opening statements. So, you can kind of get an idea from those examples of, what you're aiming for. You're aiming to just interest the person off the bat, and going back to our earlier point that this is your chance to set yourself apart, to shine, to have them say, "Oh, let me read the rest of their statement more carefully," because that's what it's about. Before you start getting into all those gory details about how you ran logistic regressions, you want them to be inspired and motivated to read carefully through the rest of the statement, because if you already lose them in the first paragraph, then honestly, I think human nature is such that they may just kind of read the rest of it in a pro forma way, and they won't really pay as close attention as they would if you'd already grabbed their attention right from the start.
Great. So I think it's really also important in your statement of purpose to describe your career trajectory, your goals for why do you want this degree and how are you going to make use of it. And it doesn't have to be one goal, because you're going to have a lifetime of goals and might even have several careers from your doctorate or a master's from UCLA. And so you may want to talk about government task force, business consultancy. Do you want to become a professor? Do you want to work for a think tank? Do you want to do some R&D, work for a nonprofit, own your own company? For any of you who want to become professors, have an inkling, I definitely mentioned that only from personal experience. And my quick story is that in my first day as a doctoral student, many, many, many years ago, my advisor asked me, "So Sam, what do you want to do when you're done with a degree here?" And I told him I wanted to be a vice president at a California community college. And in fact, that's what I did 4 years after that moment. He looked at me and said, "Sam, did you write that in your statement of purpose?" And I kind of pondered and I said, "Yeah, I think so." And he goes, "Wow, because if I had read your statement, I wouldn't have admitted you, because that's not what we're looking for." And I was crushed. And so my colleague who was sitting next to me, I asked him later, I said, "Did I say something wrong?" And he said, "Sam, these are world-class university professors who only know what they do. And so you might want to flatter them if you think that you want to be a professor and say that you want to be just like them." And part of it is an excuse that the professors, like that's been their life. This is their passion. And so they love to mentor people who want to be like them. And I would not to say that every faculty would respond the way my faculty member did. But I think that certainly if you had an inkling that you might want to be a professor, not a bad thing to just say yes. But our faculty should know better. They know that our students, their graduates, they place in all the things that are listed here and more. And that even if we wanted all of our students to become university professors, there just aren't the jobs for them. So our faculty need to be but again, it's what they know. They don't know what it's like to work for Google, most of them. They don't know what it's like to work for a nonprofit. It's easier for them to mentor someone who wants to go into the professoriate. So again, make sure that you talk about your career trajectory, and like listing faculty XYZ, you may want to talk about careers A and B, maybe not 3, but 2 might make sense for a lifetime.
Sam, before you move on, I'm sorry, can I just add one thing to your last slide, which I think is a great point about if you think you might want to become a professor, you should mention it. And of course, that varies by field, because some fields are, would be very happy to have you go out in the world and make change. But some fields, I agree, are very much focused on producing sort of mini-me's. But I would just add one other thing to think about, which is one reason that I suspect that some people are want to focus on training other professors is because that's what they feel good at. Like, we all have our comfort zone of, well, I know how to be good at what I'm doing because I've made it to full professor step 9. So obviously I'm good at being a professor, and therefore I feel competent at training somebody else how to be good at being a professor. On the other hand, if you tell me that what you really want to do is go out there and change the entire healthcare system, go into the federal government and change the entire healthcare system, I may not feel like I know how to train you to do that. And so it's not always that they don't value that. You know, they may say, oh, that's wonderful, you know, kudos to that person, that's great, but I don't know how to train them to do that. So that's what they're thinking. They may not tell you that, but I think a lot of times that's what they're thinking, is they just feel sort of ineffectual at helping you if that's your goal. So I would just second what Sam said, which is that, you know, you shouldn't hide it, and it's wonderful. You know, all of these goals are terrific, but you also just want to be mindful of the person reading your statement and thinking to themselves, if they come here, am I going to be, you know, are we going to be able to give them that education that will enable them to achieve those goals?
Right. We have 3 more slides real quickly, and we do want to get to Q&A in a couple minutes. But this one's really, I'll make it fast. So explain in a positive way and a mature manner anything unusual in your academic journey. So whatever you feel, the bumps that you've had or the challenges that you had that might have affected your performance. If you've had an illness that affected your grades, if you had to take a leave of absence because someone got ill or you got ill, if you had to transfer from one college to another and you want to make sense of why you have piecemeal transcripts, family circumstances, and it wouldn't be a bad thing for you to call out that you have a upward trend in grades. You may have started off really poorly as a first-year student, then once you caught you know, the winds, caught your sails, you start doing really well and you got really interested in your major. Not a bad thing to say, I have a 3.3, but right now I'm posting 4.0s, and I started off with a 2.0 my first semester, which really brought my average down.
Yeah.
Susan, I think this one.
Yeah, and I would just say, I would just second that last slide. That's really important, because they will notice, if, you know, they're not going to ignore the fact that you have maybe poor grades, but everybody understands, especially, you know, we get at UCLA, we're very proud of the fact that we have a lot of first-gen applicants. I myself am first-gen. And, you know, often people who are first gen, you know, we struggle because we don't really know how to go to college or what to do. And, you know, and often we don't feel like we belong there. You know, imposter syndrome is a big thing. And I'd be happy to chat with any of you later on offline about that, because it's sort of pervasive among first gen students. And, you know, and sometimes that just results in people taking really a while to, you know, to find their feet, or whatever the right expression is, and to start pulling up their grades. But people do understand that, and admissions committees are really understanding of that. And it looks really great if, you know, if you have a good trajectory, that you are able to sort of improve later on, and now you're on the right path, and everybody will acknowledge that. So, yeah. Okay, so we're still talking about the statement of purpose here, but even in the statement of purpose, there will be a separate diversity statement, at least at UCLA, that we're not talking about right now. But even in your statement of purpose, it's still important to bring up your contributions to diversity, because universities really care about that, and UCLA certainly cares about that, and you know, and admissions committees will care about that, because we all know from the research that research is better when you have people from diverse groups coming together. People have different perspectives, and everybody contributes something different, and it can really, you know, open up innovative new ideas, different ways of thinking about the questions. So So that is recognized, and it's really helpful to sort of point out anything on your resume that, you know, would be especially relevant here. For example, service efforts, programs to increase participation of groups that are historically underrepresented in higher education. You could talk about your understanding of the barriers that face women, domestic minorities, students with disabilities, other members of groups underrepresented in higher education. I just mentioned, you know, talking about being first gen, if, you know, that you can kind of explain that you had to overcome, you know, that challenge. You know, basically you want to lay out the barriers, but in order to talk about how you had the drive and motivation to get beyond those barriers, because all of you, you're all the success stories. You are all amazing, because I know that every one of you probably faced many challenges that many applicants don't have. They don't have to overcome those challenges. Things were easier. And, you know, and if you can sort of lay that out and remind the admissions committee that, you know, not only did I do well at school and do this research and all these achievements that I have, but I did it despite the fact that, you know, I was discriminated against, or, you know, I come from a really low income background and I had to work my way through college, or, you know, or I'm first gen and nobody in my family could really help me, you know, figure out how to navigate, you know, the system, things like that. That really looks good, because we like it when people, you know, when people show that they have that kind of motivation. It's just incredibly impressive. And, you know, and also your experience bringing research from non-traditional educational backgrounds or understanding of experiences of individuals from groups that are underrepresented in higher education. Again, all these diverse perspectives really strengthen the work that all of us do, not just your own work that might focus on that, but, you know, but you're bringing a perspective and opening up the eyes of other people who may not have thought of something in a certain way, and that will make their research better too. So don't hesitate to remind the admissions committee of those points.
We have 2 final slides, and I know we want time for Q&A, so real quickly, Susan, this
this one's really quick. Be really careful not to plagiarize. And I know sometimes it can be easy to inadvertently plagiarize, but just, you know, go through what you've written and make sure that anything at all that needs to be cited gets cited. And if you're using language, and this is true for throughout your graduate career as well, if you're using language that it all could be construed as copying from somebody else, put quotation marks around it. Just quote them directly and be done with it, because plagiarism is taken very seriously, and it's much easier to figure out with all the, you know, software that can be used to figure it out. And it's not pretty if you get caught plagiarizing, even if that wasn't really your intent. There's no way to know. So just be super careful.
Final slide is proofread. We gave you many examples of why you might inadvertently put someone else's institution, but I also know sometimes you cut and paste your Word documents into the form that you apply, and sometimes it truncates. And so make sure that if you put a 500-word essay, that all 500 words appear, and if it doesn't and you're only given 450, you have to figure out a way to massage it so it doesn't look like your concluding paragraph was truncated. I think we're going to leave it at that and answer any questions that you have. Susan, did you want?
Can I just make the plug for using spell check and grammar check, and again, using somebody with fresh eyes, because if you have a typo, even one typo, again, the problem is it will be taken as a sign that you couldn't be bothered to spend 30 seconds to use spell check to find it. And I know spell check's not perfect, which is why I'm also suggesting getting another reader. But just you don't want to come across as careless when you're applying to, you know, especially a research program where it's all about being meticulous with your data. So.